Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today we wanted to talk about substrate. We're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of certain types of substrate and whether or not substrate is even required. So stay tuned. Alright, so the first thing we want to look at is, do you need a substrate? What are the advantages and disadvantages of having no substrate in your tank at all? So I think one of the big advantages to not having any substrate in a tank is the fact that it's really easy to clean. So you can take a gravel vac, you know exactly what's in there, the fish waste, the food that's accumulated, and you can eliminate that relatively easily. Now, another disadvantage is that a lot of people who breed fish like discus or some of the less hardy types of fish, that might work out pretty well because that's going to allow you to get rid of fish waste and to keep the water quality up as best you possibly can. Still, other people like the way it looks, and so you maybe like the way that a substrate-less tank looks. The other advantage is it costs next to nothing. So it doesn't really cost you anything to put in no substrate. But there are some disadvantages, and so first thing, a lot of people don't like the way a tank looks where there is no substrate, no gravel, no sand or anything like that. It might not look very natural. The other advantage to having some type of substrate in the tank is the fact that substrate is surface area. And anytime you've got surface area in the tank, that's going to allow you to grow microbes, and those microbes will allow you to get rid of ammonia and nitrites, and gravel and sand allow a lot of surface area to grow those microbes. Another advantage may be if you've got gravel or sand in a tank, it might hide the fish waste a little bit more. And so when you're done cleaning, a couple days later, it doesn't look like a mess. And that's one of the disadvantages of having a bare bottom tank is you can clean it. And so often you'll see, fish tanks on YouTube and they look awesome. They're bare bottom. They look fantastically clean. If you were to fast forward 24 to 48 hours, those tanks, if not cared for, are probably going to look fairly messy, and now you've got all the fish waste and all the uneaten food clearly visible, and that will be stirring up into the water column. And so you really have to stay on your tank maintenance in order to make that look pretty good. Another thing to consider is some fish really like to interact with the substrate. Certain fish like to burrow themselves in substrate. Certain fish may feel more comfortable in a setting where substrate exists. Also, if you're going to be keeping plants in a tank, a substrate-less tank is going to be a little bit harder because you may have to use potted plants in order to add plants to the tank, or maybe you have to tie plants to driftwood and rocks and things like that, which may be okay, but you won't be able to obviously plant them in a tank without any substrate. So those are just some of the advantages and disadvantages. Now for us in our fish room, all of our tanks have substrate because I prefer to have that look. I prefer more of a natural look, and I have sort of an ecosystem, and a lot of the fry tanks that we have, they're not so sensitive, and it allows us to keep substrate in just about every tank, or we keep substrate in every tank that we have. So what we're going to do next is I want to talk a little bit about the different types of substrate, and so things like, gravel and sand, and then some of the specialty substrates. But to do that, I actually want to walk around our fish room and give you a better idea of what some of these substrates look like. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of having gravel and sand and some of the specialty substrates as well. So stay tuned. So I wanted to talk about gravel a little bit. As you can see here, we've got a 75-gallon tank with some black gravel. This gravel is a little bit older. It's a number of years old. One of the advantages I think of using gravel is that it can look nice, and so that is certainly appealing. The other nice thing is you can get different colors and different shapes of gravel to kind of suit your needs. Now, as I mentioned before, gravel also does a really good job of hiding fish waste. Now that can be both good and bad. If you're breeding fish and water quality is an absolute must and the accumulation of waste is highly discouraged, then you're going to want possibly a bare bottom tank. But for those people who are an average fish hobbyist, once you clean your tank, you really don't want to have to look at fish waste a couple days later. And gravel does a good job of hiding that waste until you can do your gravel vac and your water change the following week. The other nice thing is plants are going to be, in some cases, okay. Some plants don't root particularly well in gravel, while others, they still do okay. But there are some disadvantages to gravel. And the reason I started here on this 75-gallon tank is because the gravel that we chose for this tank happens to be fairly large. And because of that, uneaten food tends to get trapped in that gravel a lot sooner than gravel that is a smaller size. So if you're going to choose gravel, at least from my personal experience, I would not choose the larger stones like we see here in the 75, just because it does trap waste more than any of the other tanks that we have because of the size of the gravel. Other disadvantages, well, this is going to cost more than not having a substrate at all. So it's going to cost more than a bare bottom tank. And then you'll also see when we first purchased this gravel, it was black. And now as we look at the gravel, you can see that in fact some of the stones are turning white. All of it is certainly less colorful than when we got it a number of years ago. And so over time, if you are buying colored gravels, they're probably going to lose their color. Also, you have to think about the fish that you're keeping. Some fish would prefer not to have gravel, but maybe have sand instead. Fish that come to mind might be some of the loaches, or perhaps some cory cats, where their marbles might become damaged if they're trying to move large gravel pieces over time to get at food. And so that's something else that you have to keep in mind. But overall, gravel's a great choice. It's readily available. It's relatively cheap. Usually you're looking at between $1 and $1.50 per pound of gravel. And often it's recommended to get anywhere between 1 to 2 pounds of gravel per gallon of fish tank. Obviously, the surface area of the fish tank is going to kind of play into that as well. In a tank like this, I think we did about 1.5 pounds of gravel per gallon. And this is about what we got. We've got maybe 2 or 3 inches of substrate on the bottom of the tank. And so we see that here, big green sebum. So that's the 75. Now the other thing I wanted to do was take you over to the 150 and show you what a smaller gravel looks like. And so here we have our 150, and a couple things here. We've got a smaller size gravel, which means it doesn't trap as much uneaten food. This gravel tends to trap a lot less waste, and so when we're doing our gravel vacuuming, this tends to be a much cleaner substrate. You can see here again, this is on our 150. One thing, this happens to have some blue gravel mixed in. I would say at this point, it's not something I would repeat. I would prefer just to have a solid color. But this is the price you pay when you go to the pet store and you tell your wife you want to spend well over $1,000 on getting a 150-gallon tank set up. And her only request is that she can pick out some blue gravel for the tank. And so I said, sure, you can put in a couple bags of blue gravel. And the funny thing is now, my wife doesn't like the blue gravel either. So at some point, this will be a project where we may end up removing this substrate, this gravel, and choosing a different color. But you can see here, it is a smaller size, and so it doesn't trap the uneaten food quite as much. So here I wanted to show you our 29, and what I wanted to show you here is a more natural looking gravel. And so quite often, at least in my tanks, you'll notice if I've got gravel, it's either going to be black, or in this case, I've got a brown gravel, and it's actually a mix. There are some smaller pebbles in here, along with a little bit of larger ones. You can see I've got live plants in this tank, and they're doing fine. Again, some plants will be okay with gravel, others would probably prefer some type of specialty substrate, which we'll talk about in a second. So the next option we have is using sand. Now, one of the advantages of using sand, a lot of people think it looks great, maybe even more natural than some of the gravels. The sand that you are looking at here, and in almost all of my tanks, at least the light colored sand, is pool filter sand. An advantage of that is it's relatively cheap. If you were to buy sand at a pet store, it's similar in price to gravel, where you're probably looking at between $1 and $1.50 per pound. The pool filter sand, you might be able to get 50 pounds for somewhere around $10, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on where you purchase it. You can also get different colors of sand, but primarily you're looking at either white or something like this, which is it's not quite white, it's a little bit more naturally colored. Or you could do maybe a black, like the Nat Geo sands often come in black. Just like the gravel, it will hide a little bit of waste, but it doesn't hide it as well, which we'll talk about more in a minute. And some plants will grow just fine in sand, and I've got some of our tanks that are sand substrates are growing plants, and the plants are doing okay. Now there are some disadvantages to sand. One being that if you've got a lot of sand packed up, it may begin to trap hydrogen sulfide gas, which when released into the tank may harm fish. Another disadvantage, some plants don't root well in sand, and so that can be an issue. Of course, it's going to cost more than doing a bare bottom tank, but it's about the same as what you would expect to pay for gravel. Some fish really like the sand, so again, if you've got fish that are burrowing, like these multis love sand. I'll show you some geophagus that are enjoying the sand. Cory cats also really like sand as well. One thing, if you are going to get sand other than what you would buy at a pet store, stick with the pool filter sand as opposed to the play sand. Play sand is a much finer grain. It packs more tightly. It's not quite as easy to work with. It's a little bit harder to clean before you're putting it in the tank. So I would stick, at least me personally, I would stick with pool filter sand before I would go the play sand route. Now, to me, the biggest disadvantage to using sand is the fact that it does show waste far quicker than gravel. This tank was cleaned just a few days ago, and I wanted to show you what it looks like. So we've got some waste, and there are only 6 small fry in here, 6 small juveniles, along with a few Cory cats, a pleco, and a small Synodontis, and we've already got a decent amount of waste. Let me show you what sand will look like with 9 jewel cichlids after about 4 days. And again, I left this, we were going to clean this today, and I said, you know what, let's go ahead and leave this. I knew we were shooting this video. This is what you see. All right, so if you're somebody who likes a really clean tank, and after you go through and do the maintenance, you want to enjoy that tank for, maybe a week, that's not too much to ask, then you really have to consider this. All right, this is 9 jewel cichlids. We don't feed this tank overly heavy. I wouldn't say for a 40 breeder, it's stocked extremely heavy, but this is what you see after about 4 days, and it gets a little bit dirty. Now, if we come over here to our geophagus tank, and we'll talk more about these in a future video. You're gonna have to excuse the glass. I've left that algae on here because I've got some smaller bristlenose. Now, this tank we cleaned again about 4 days ago, but because geophagus like to sift through the sand is relatively clean. All right, what you're seeing is really my bad job of the glass, but you can see here that the sand itself is pretty decent. So again, this partially depends on the fish. One last example that I wanted to show you. We just cleaned this tank a couple days ago, and this is the Mbuna tank. It's relatively heavily stocked. It gets a decent amount of food, but you can see the fish waste all on the bottom, and we make sure that this stuff is gone. And again, I left it here on purpose just so you could get a really good idea of what to expect if you're using sand. Maybe somebody's got a better method, but we suck all the waste off the surface and typically do a really good job of that, but it builds up pretty quick. So that's just one disadvantage. All right, so the last type of substrate I wanted to talk about, I actually have an example here in this, what I consider to be my wild 20 hive. Got a rock wall that I built in the back. I let these plants just go crazy. We'll talk more about this tank at another time. It's just a look I prefer. But one of the things that we want to discuss here is the substrate. This is fluorite, and it's what I would consider to be one of the more specialty substrates. Things like Fluorite, Eco-Complete, Aqua Soil. These substrates are primarily designed for those who want to have planted tanks. Now the Fluorite, the advantage here is not that it really has a lot of nutrients to begin with, but that it will trap nutrients as they are added to the substrate. And the plants can then feed on those nutrients, and you can see here these plants are going absolutely crazy. They like it quite a bit. For the most part, these substrates, the specialty substrates, look pretty nice. They generally are darker in color. They're going to do great for plants, especially like the Aqua Soils and the Eco-Completes. Those types of substrates do have nutrients, and the plants can then use them and grow, and they typically grow pretty well. In terms of, hiding dirt and things like that, well, if it's a planted tank, chances are you want some of that fish waste to stay in there because that's going to help fertilize the substrate so the plants have nutrients. Now, there are some disadvantages to a specialty substrate, and one is that it's typically going to be more expensive than either gravel or the sand that we've discussed so far. You may be limited in terms of the colors that you can choose, And in some instances, you may need to actually replace the substrate if the nutrients become depleted, or begin to add root tabs and other types of fertilizers. Also, for some substrates, it may not be completely necessary to have the specialty substrates if you're not going to be using the proper lighting, or perhaps maybe taking full advantage of them by injecting CO2. This tank does not have any CO2. It's just the fertilizers that we use, the liquid fertilizers and the root tabs, and we've got a Stingray 24/7 Planet Plus on the top, and that's about it. So again, I just wanted to show you the specialty substrate that we see down here. It's almost the consistency of a black sand. It's about the same as consistency as like maybe a pool filter sand, but again, it's great for planted tanks. All right, everyone, so I hope you found this useful. It gives you something to think about, whether you do gravel or sand or a specialty substrate, or maybe you just go bare bottom. So we'd like to thank you for watching. We really appreciate everybody who's been commenting, and in the comment section, maybe leave your opinion. What's your favorite type of substrate? What do you like to use? What do you find the easiest to work with? Do you even use a substrate? We'd love to hear from you. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.